He did indeed have a very powerful delivery manner, one that many actors, comedians, ordinary citizens relive for us. And I know that many of us are in awe whenever Tata speaks. And Madiba was just one of those people, so confident in his own convictions that he didn't mind laughing at himself as well.
Right. We're going to be having a discussion about the great oratory skills that Utata had and how much we can learn, how much others learn from him in an academic sense, how to speak like he does. But there are those who just straight out copy him and try to make us laugh by doing so. Take a look at this.
In any society, in any country, there are three groups or three kinds of people. The first kind that we have are those that we call the caretakers. These are people who take care of other people's business rather than taking care of their own business. The second group are those that we call the undertakers. These are people who take things under. They don't care what happens. But the third kind are the people who are in this auditorium right now. These are the people who see the possibilities in the midst of the impossible. These are the people who realize that they can turn their mess of the past into the message of the future. These are the people who realize that they can turn their tests of the past into the testimonies of the future. And these are what I call in this room the risk taker.
His real name, Agri Nonake, but if you close your eyes, well, you might believe it's Utata Nelson Mandela.
Yeah.
Madiba was a great orator. He had the ability to captivate an audience. Here to help us understand the power of the public speaker and the distinct persona that was Nelson Mandela is Abdullah Varachia, leadership and management consultant and faculty member from Gordon's Institute for Business Science. A lot of you business people know it as GIBS. And Abdullah, how much are we, as the years go by, going to be studying the way Utata spoke to all of us, spoke to the world, as a way that we can learn to speak to other people?
Sure, I think it's important, and I'm not going to try and do the impersonation of Nelson Mandela because I'll no way come close, but I think it's important to really, and the challenge I've had in the last 2 weeks that we've had in this country is we've been giving, in many instances, the discussions that we've had, a very one-dimensional view of Nelson Mandela. We've talked about Nelson Mandela, the reconciliator, but it's important to understand that Nelson Mandela, between 1990 and 2006, to an extent when he started coming out of public life, was the 16 years. But Nelson Mandela is 95 years of age, and in the 95 years, the communicator that Nelson Mandela came through expanded a number of different levels. And we look at those different levels. At the age of 9, when Nelson Mandela lost his father, the aspect of communication came in terms of how he engaged with elders in the family, how he engaged with the cousin that then took him on and then educated him. Nelson Mandela, when he was a member of the SRC at Fort Hare, and the struggle that they had there in terms of access to food at Fort Hare. And that was a different type of communicator. Nelson Mandela is a member of Umkhonto weSizwe, rallying the masses, and it requires a different type of communicator. And then in 1990, on the 11th of February, standing in the Grand Parade, when the 40, 50 million South Africans and the billions of people around the world who'd never seen you, and seeing you now for the first time, and the massive weight that's then on your responsibility and your shoulders, how do you then communicate the message? And we see the impact of that there. And I think for me, the most telling aspect of communication that Nelson Mandela brought to the fore was in 1993, in this very studios here at the SABC, when we had the tragic death of Comrade Chris Hani. And Chris Hani played an indelible role in terms of where we are as a country, an instrumental role. And we see the impact of the loss of a leader in a country today. And we think back to 1993, the tremors that went into our heart when Chris Hani was assassinated in this country. And I think Nelson Mandela at that time, through the power of communication and the power of engaging with the public, saved this country from the brink of a civil war. And that's what communication does.
Now, Abdullah, what makes a good speaker? What makes a great speech? and how much of any speech becomes an oration and how much becomes content?
I think we've had the fortunate privilege in this country to have some phenomenal speakers, and Nelson Mandela sits in that category there. I read the other day the 1999 speech when he left Parliament, and many people have spoken to the quotes of Nelson Mandela and the sayings that he had. And the Sowetan the other day had the 50 top sayings of Nelson Mandela, and they span everything from education and the importance of education, and the issue of the abuse of some of the vulnerable people in our society, women and young children. And when we talk about living the values of Madiba, all we need to do is go through some of these speeches and look at some of the quotes and some of the sentiments that he expressed in the 18 years that we had the personal interaction with him as South Africans and as people of the world. So going back to the question, what makes a great orator? Well, one, I think it's the ability to captivate an audience, the ability to be able to engage with people from different parts and different avenues and different walks of life. And too often we think about public speaking and oration only as engaging with members of parliament, as a politician. But Nelson Mandela did more than that. Nelson Mandela is famous for sitting with a group of children, with some of them sitting on his lap and singing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star to them. That's a fantastic orator. That's an individual who understands the audience, who understands I'm talking to people between the ages of 3 and 10 years old. So I must talk the language that they speak. When Nelson Mandela spoke to elders within the community, he spoke a different language. He sat on the floor and he engaged with them and communicated with them. When Nelson Mandela chaired a meeting of the NEC of the ANC, and at that time you've got different personalities in the NEC, he chaired it with a different way. So I think the art of communication is determining the audience that you're speaking to and utilizing the experience that you're going to engage with to determine how you engage with people.
Abdullah, unfortunately we're out of time, but the voice...
You could listen to him forever, right?
No, we could. But the voice that was Utata Nelson Mandela, I think, was the actual difference. We can study it and say, well, you know, we worked out this and that trick that he used in his speaking, but it was simply that it was Utata speaking. That is why we listened, and that is why we followed. We'll be back after this.
I love Nelson Mandela because he saved us from we will miss Dr. Mandela because he loves children. I know Dr. Mandela was the leader, so I want to be a leader. Dr. Mandela loved everyone and forgave everyone, and I also want to love everyone and forgive everyone.
I love Dr. Mandela because he loves children.
Dr. Mandela, we love you because you love children. I know Dada wanted children to go to school.
I want to give the world all the truth.
When I grow up, I want to be a doctor, to go to university and to be a doctor to help others enjoy.
I want to be a doctor because I heard Tata Mandela was building a children's hospital.